Hello, my name is Sarah Dean, and this is video 2 in a video series on introductory medical statistics. So let's talk about what goes into a cost-benefit analysis. When making medical decisions, we are always weighing good and bad. All medical interventions come with risk and negative side effects. We call these collectively costs. And costs have to be weighed against benefits. This is where statistics can guide our decision-making. They can tell us the likelihood of a particular outcome, but that's kind of where their utility ends. An individual also must weigh the magnitude of the possible positive outcomes with the magnitude of the possible negative outcomes. We may be willing to take bigger risks where the good outcome is very good, and we may be more risk-averse where the bad outcome is very bad. But how two outcomes are weighted is subjective, and it varies by person. So, for example, different cancer patients feel differently about the trade-off between extending their lives while suffering the negative side effects of chemotherapy versus living a shorter life without side effects. How they feel about this is going to be influenced by the severity of their side effects, their religious and moral values, their family situation, their finances, etc. This is why medical decisions are so personal. Numbers and data are important, but they may mean different things to different people because people have different expectations, philosophies, and experiences. This can cause two different people to make two different personal choices, even when they have the exact same knowledge. Ideally, everyone would have the best information to inform their decisions. Then we have to respect what a person chooses to do with that information. So let's look at a controversial example. With a rise in home births in the last couple decades, more research is going into the safety of at-home birth versus hospital birth. So let's do a cost-benefit analysis on home birth. To do this, we first have to understand why some people prefer to birth at home. Some people want to give birth at home because home feels friendlier and more comfortable to them. Some women birth at home to avoid invasive interventions. There is data that suggests hospitals pressure parents to accept unnecessary birthing interventions. In the United States, our C-section rate is extremely high. Sometimes interventions can be life-saving, right? But any intervention, particularly a surgery, a major surgery like C-section, comes with risk, so should only be used when necessary. Some women would like to honor birth as a sacred experience. They want to treat the transition to motherhood in a spiritual way, and they feel that this cannot be achieved in the hospital environment. Home births can give a family more agency over their birthing experience. Often the mother's partner can have more involvement in the birthing process than they might have in a hospital, and many partners want this. In fact, the whole family can be involved. So while some people think it's strange to involve children in birth of a sibling, others argue that it can help the child's difficult transition to older sibling by empowering them to help the mother and the new baby and allowing them to feel included in the changes that their family is going through. So, home births have many charming features for certain families, but are they safe? Lots of things are now known to affect the safety of home births, such as who is attending it. Some women have home births attended by nurse practitioners, and some have unattended home births, representing the two extremes. In an unattended home birth, there is no one in the room with the birthing mother. In some states, home birth is illegal. In that case, a midwife might be reluctant to transfer a birthing mother to a hospital in an emergency. In other states, midwives can establish relationships with hospital birthing wards, and hospitals will support efficient transfer from home to hospital when it's necessary. And this obviously makes home birth safer. In some parts of the world, midwives are allowed to administer more interventions than in others. Some midwives can, for example, carry oxygen tanks to help inflate infant lungs, and Pitocin shots to prevent hemorrhage in the mother if there are problems birthing the placenta. In other places, midwives cannot provide these services for their patients. And then health of the patient also makes a difference. High-risk patients are more likely to need extensive interventions than low-risk patients, and this affects the risk of birthing at home. The statistics I'm about to provide here are from recent sources, published by medical professionals and researchers in peer-reviewed medical journals. In both cases, only healthy mothers are included in the study, and all births were attended by a nurse midwife, either in the hospital or at the mother's home. I want you to think about how each of these statistics makes you feel about home birth. All right, risk of neonatal death rises 0.06% in home birth over hospital birth. How risky does this make you feel home birth is? Is it what you would have expected? All right, here's another statistic. Neonates are 3 times more likely to die when born at home than when born at the hospital. How risky does this statistic make you feel home birth is? And is it what you would have expected? In my previous video, we talked about how statistics can sometimes tell contradictory stories. Which of these statistics do you believe and why? Do these numbers tell contradictory stories? Could they both be true at the same time? The truth is that both of those statistics come from the same publication. Neonatal mortality in the United States is related to location of birth, hospital versus home, rather than the type of birth attendant. This research paper was published in the American Journal of Obstetric Gynecology in 2020. They are both true, but they represent 2 different pieces of the story. One statistic deals in relative risk values and the other in absolute risk values. So what does that mean? Neonate mortality is 3 times higher at home than in a hospital. And you can tell that from the yellow highlight, where it says the odds ratio equals 2.9 right here, which means the risk is 2.9 times higher at home. And I'm just rounding to 3 times. 3 times higher risk at home. But the risk in the hospital is so low to begin with that a 3 times increase is a very small increase. So in purple, you can see that the absolute neonate mortality rate in the hospital is 3.27 in 10,000 births. That's 0.0327% mortality. So I'm just going to round that to 0.03% mortality to make things a little easier on us. Now, if you'll look again at the yellow, you'll see that the absolute neonate mortality rate with midwives at home is 9.48 out of 10,000, or 0.0948%. And I'm just going to round that number to 0.09% to make things easier on us. Now, in relative terms, 0.09 is 3 times higher than 0.03. But in absolute terms, the risk increased only 0.06% because the difference between 0.03 and 0.09 is 0.06. So you'll notice that when we're using relative risk, we're multiplying, and when we're using absolute risk, we're adding. This tells you that home birth is probably more dangerous than hospital birth, but maybe not a huge increase in risk for healthy mothers with a nurse midwife. The risk might be small enough to make it worth considering the benefits home births provide to some families. If someone were to present only one of these statistics to you, it might mislead you, not because it is a lie, but because of 2 things. 1, it's not all of the information. And 2, you haven't been trained yet to understand exactly what these different statistics means. it is important to list both relative and absolute risk together because they each tell you a different part of the story, and it can be difficult to interpret one without the other. If the hospital risk was larger, like 25% mortality, and home birth was 3 times that, bringing it to 75% mortality, that would be an entirely different scenario, right? That would be an absolute risk increase of 50%. Pretty much everyone would agree that is an unacceptable increase in risk. On the other hand, if the hospital risk was lower, let's say the hospital risk was 0.0001%, a 3 times increase in relative risk would be 0.0003%. The relative risk is still 3 times because 0.0003% is 3 times higher than 0.0001%. So relative risk is the same in these two scenarios, but the scale is entirely different. The scale is given to you by the absolute risk. The absolute risk increase is 0.0002% in this last scenario. Most people would consider that negligible and an unimportant risk increase when making decisions about their health, even though it's still 3 times greater. So the practical implications of relative risk changes a lot depending on whether the original risk was very low or very high. The purpose of this part of the video series is to get you thinking about different ways numbers and data can work and be reported, and to convince you that it is important to know at least some basic statistics to help you more accurately understand health information you might regularly encounter. In the next video, I'll go into more detail about how to calculate different types of risk.